You say you want peace. You tell yourself that's all you've ever wanted. A quiet mind, a stable life, a sense that everything is finally enough. But look closer. Every time peace gets near you, you reach for something that ruins it. Not by accident, by choice. You don't call it a choice, of course. You call it circumstance. You call it bad luck. You call it, that's just how things happen. But there is a quieter voice beneath all of that, a voice that knows. You did this. You chose chaos, and not once, not rarely, but over and over again, in ways so subtle you almost admire yourself for hiding them. You say you want calm, but you check your phone at midnight knowing exactly what will disturb you. You say you want love, but when someone offers it, steady, patient, uncomplicated, you feel something inside you recoil, as if peace itself were an insult. You say you want clarity, yet you drown yourself in overthinking until even the simplest decision becomes unbearable. It isn't that you don't recognize peace. It's that you don't trust it. And somewhere deep inside you, you don't believe you deserve it. Dostoevsky understood this. Not as an abstract idea, not as philosophy written from a comfortable distance, but as something raw, lived, and unavoidable. He saw the human mind not as a rational machine, but as a battlefield where logic loses more often than it wins. There's a man, he once imagined, not a hero, not even a villain, just a man who lives underground, not physically, but psychologically. A man who knows exactly what is good for him and refuses it. A man who sees the path to peace clearly and deliberately walks in the opposite direction, not because he is stupid, but because he is human. Because there is something inside him and inside you that resists anything too simple, too orderly, too predictable. You don't sabotage your peace because you don't understand it. You sabotage it because part of you cannot tolerate it. Look at your life closely, and you'll start to notice a pattern. You meet someone kind, they listen, they don't play games, they don't create drama, they make things easy. And suddenly, something feels wrong. Not on the surface. On the surface, everything is perfect. But underneath, there is a quiet discomfort, a restlessness, a strange sense that something is missing. You tell yourself, there's no spark. But what you really mean is, there's no chaos, no uncertainty, no emotional turbulence, no highs that feel like addiction, and lows that feel like withdrawal. And without that, you don't feel alive. So you drift away, or worse, you stay, but you create the chaos yourself. You overanalyze their words, you question their intentions, you start small conflicts over nothing. You test them, push them, provoke them, not consciously, but inevitably. Because peace feels empty to you, and chaos feels like meaning. Dostoevsky's underground man would laugh at this, not kindly but knowingly, because he understood that humans don't actually want what is good for them, not consistently, not purely. We want something more complicated. We want to feel, even if what we feel destroys us, especially if it destroys us. You see this in the smallest moments. You open a message from someone you care about. It's simple, warm, nothing threatening. But instead of accepting it, you reread it. You search for hidden meanings. You imagine what they might really be thinking. You create a story that wasn't there, and suddenly your mind is racing. Your heart is no longer calm. And somehow, that feels more real. Because calm feels fragile, temporary, like something that could vanish at any moment. But chaos? Chaos feels familiar. it feels like home. You don't trust peace because peace doesn't match the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. If you grew up in unpredictability, calm feels unnatural. If you've been hurt before, stability feels suspicious.
If you've spent years believing something is wrong with you, happiness feels like a mistake waiting to be corrected. So you correct it yourself. You ruin things before they can settle. You leave before you can be left. You overthink until clarity collapses into confusion. You choose chaos, not because you enjoy suffering, but because suffering makes sense to you. It aligns with your expectations. It confirms your fears. And there is something deeply seductive about being right, even when you're right about your own unhappiness. Dostoevsky himself lived this contradiction. He stood in front of a firing squad, believing his life was over. He felt the finality of death, the unbearable clarity that comes when everything is about to end. And then, at the last moment, he was spared, given life again. You would think such an experience would make a person cling to peace, to stability, to simplicity. But it didn't. He returned to life not with calm, but with intensity, with obsession, with inner conflict that never truly resolved. He gambled away money he didn't have. He fell into cycles of desperation and relief. He wrote with a kind of urgency that felt less like creation and more like survival. Because once you've seen the edge, normal life doesn't feel enough. And maybe, in your own quieter way, you've felt something similar. Not a firing squad, perhaps, but moments where everything could have been lost. Moments of emotional intensity so sharp they carved themselves into your memory. And now, anything less than that feels dull. So you recreate it, in arguments, in relationships, in your own mind. You turn small uncertainties into crises. You turn simple decisions into existential dilemmas. You amplify everything until your inner world feels as intense as those moments that once defined you. Because peace feels like forgetting, and you don't want to forget, even if remembering hurts. There's a part of you that believes suffering is proof of depth. But if you're not struggling, not questioning, not in conflict, then you're not really alive. This is the paradox. You don't choose chaos because you hate peace. You choose chaos because peace feels like emptiness, and emptiness is unbearable. But here's where it gets darker. Because if you follow this pattern far enough, you start to realize something even more uncomfortable. You don't just tolerate chaos. You need it. Not consciously, not in a way you would ever admit out loud, but in the quiet spaces, in the decisions no one sees, in the habits you repeat without questioning. You keep feeding it. You stay up too late, knowing tomorrow will be harder. You revisit conversations that upset you, replaying them until they lose all meaning. You push people away, then wonder why you feel alone. You create problems where none existed just to feel something. And when things finally collapse, when the chaos reaches its peak, when everything feels overwhelming and painful, there is a strange sense of relief. Because now, your inner world matches your outer reality. Now, the conflict makes sense. Now, you don't have to pretend everything is okay. Dostoevsky's Underground Man once suggested that humans will deliberately act against their own best interests just to prove they are free, that they are not machines, that they are not bound by logic. And maybe that's what you're doing. Maybe your chaos is not just a mistake. Maybe it's a declaration, a quiet, desperate insistence that you are more than a predictable, rational being. But freedom, when misunderstood, becomes self-destruction.
Because if the only way you prove your freedom is by hurting yourself, then you are not free. You are trapped in a different kind of prison. One where you are both the prisoner and the guard. You see this in how you think. You analyze everything, every possibility, every outcome, every hidden meaning.
You believe that if you just think hard enough, long enough, deeply enough, you will find clarity. But instead, you find paralysis. Because overthinking is not a search for truth, it's a way to avoid it. The truth is often simple, painfully simple. But simplicity demands action, and action is terrifying. So you stay in thought, you stay in chaos, because as long as you're thinking, you don't have to choose. And as long as you don't choose, you don't have to face the consequences of being wrong. But there is another layer beneath this, a deeper contradiction. You want control, but you create chaos. You want stability, but you avoid consistency. You want peace, but you reject the very conditions that create it. Because peace requires something you're not comfortable with. Responsibility. Not in the practical sense, but in the existential sense. Peace means there is no one left to blame. Not your past, not other people, not circumstances. Just you. And that is unbearable. Because if you are responsible for your peace, then you are also responsible for your chaos. And that realization cuts deeper than any external problem ever could. So you avoid it. You complicate things. You create narratives that justify your patterns. You tell yourself stories about why things are the way they are. But beneath all of that, there is a quiet awareness. You know, you've always known, that many of the storms in your life began with you. Not because you're broken, but because you are human in the most uncomfortable sense. A being capable of seeing the good and choosing against it. Not out of ignorance, but out of something darker, something more complex. Something that cannot be solved with simple answers or comforting advice. Because this is not a problem to fix. It's a contradiction to face. You are drawn to what hurts you. You resist what heals you. You long for peace, but fear what it will reveal. And maybe that's the real reason you choose chaos.
Because chaos gives you something to fight. And without something to fight, you would have to sit with yourself. Without distraction, without conflict, without the noise. Just you. And whatever is left when everything else falls away. That silence, that stillness, that is what you are really avoiding. Not peace itself, but what peace exposes. Because in peace, there is nowhere to hide, no excuses, no external forces to blame. Just the quiet, undeniable presence of your own thoughts, and the question you've been avoiding all along. If everything were truly calm, if nothing were wrong, if your life finally became exactly what you say you want, would you even know who you are? Or would you feel the urge to destroy it? And if that urge is still there, then the chaos you keep choosing was never outside of you. It was always waiting within you.